of the Ad Podcast. And today I have a super exciting episode for you guys, not only because you guys tune in and love my show, because we talk about the creator economy. And we actually have Dr. Travis Bradberry, who, amongst many things that we'll get into in a second, holds the all-time record for the most watched video post on LinkedIn in history with 3.7 million views. Dr. Travis Bradberry is also a New York Times bestselling author of the books Emotional Intelligence 2.0, Leadership 2.0, and his most recently released Emotional Intelligence Habits. And he is a leading authority on the topic of emotional intelligence, working with iconic brands like Intel, Coke, and Microsoft. So Dr. Bradberry, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
Awesome, man. Well, the first thing I'd love to just hop to, obviously you've spent a great depth of your career researching and thinking about the topic of emotional intelligence. When did you first identify this topic, and when did it become just this obsession that you had to dedicate, so much brain power to writing and talking and teaching and researching? What was that moment, and why was it so important for you?
Yeah, the first seed was planted when I was an undergrad at UCSD, and one of my classes covered Peter Salovey's study at Yale, looking at emotional intelligence and life outcomes, and that people did better that had higher EQs. And my first thought was, this is something that I didn't learn growing up. I could use this, and I got really curious about it. And I was only there for 3 years. I was kind of itching to get to grad school, so I graduated early. And so I was only 21 starting my PhD program, and I dove right into it, because you do a lot of, even coursework there is very in-depth into topical areas. And I just chose emotional intelligence as a topic over and over again, all the way through to my dissertation. And by the time I graduated, I had already started the business Talent Smart with my partner, my business partner. So I was neck deep in it by the time I even finished school.
Wow, that's crazy. So it's awesome that you identified it so early and have been able to dedicate basically your entire career and your doctorate background into researching that. So it's actually a bittersweet word for me, because I've only been fired once in the history of my career, and I was fired for having low emotional IQ.
Really?
I was working for another thought leader and a hero of mine, a guy named Keith Ferrazzi, who wrote the book Never Eat Alone. I kind of really bought into the culture of his IP and came into the organization and was a bit of a bull in a china shop, kind of very accusational against people that I thought weren't like living up to the IP that was expounded in the books. And as much as Keith loved my tenacity, my inability to kind of fit in a little bit more of a subtle way actually was the first time it ever hurt me in my career. So kind of a strong lesson on the topic, which is kind of interesting.
Yeah, it's funny how you're regardless of your skill set and the value you bring to the table, if you're having trouble playing nice with others, it can really throw the train off the tracks.
Yeah, for sure. So I wanted to ask you, do you have a current definition of emotional intelligence, and has it changed at all over the course of your work?
No, it definitely hasn't changed. And, that definition is it's your capacity for understanding emotions in yourself and others, and it's your capacity for understanding them and then doing something with that knowledge, doing something more effective. So, our brains are hardwired to give emotions the upper hand. We have more than 400 emotional experiences every single day, and they are happening whether you are aware of them or not. So your emotional intelligence is really how aware you are of your emotions, and then what you do with that awareness, how you respond to them to produce the behavior that you want.
Yeah, no, I love that. I know you outlined it in a particular example of having, people with high emotional intelligence have a 5-lane superhighway that traffics the thoughts between the logical part of your brain and the emotional part of your brain. And many people are dealing with, a 2-lane street that is pretty clogged up with congestion. Can you talk about how that, that traffic highway through the brain can be upgraded over time and look more like a super highway or the Autobahn versus a 2-way street?
Yeah, sure. Well, the key thing here is there's components of your brain that are not very malleable and flexible to change. So if you look at something like your personality, you see extroverted 2-year-olds that are extroverted when they're 60-year-olds. A lot of these areas of the brain are very hardwired. But the pathway between your limbic system, where emotions are generated, and the prefrontal cortex up at the front of your brain, where you're able to think rationally about what you're feeling, is very malleable. It responds to change. So there's a flow of information that happens back and forth. As you spend more time thinking about your emotions and having awareness of them, you increase that flow of information, and your brain responds by growing new connections between the neurons. So they start to branch out, connect with each other. Your brain loves efficiency. So when you practice these new behaviors and this awareness, it facilitates that. It wants that to be easy and thoughtless. So that is what turns the rutted country road into the 5-lane superhighway, is just that spending the time to build that. Yeah,
no, I love that. I was very hopeful. And I think, I shared that example, with you, that in my 20s, that was a reason that I had been let go from a position. And I was really excited about doing the research and listening to your 2 books over the last couple of days, is that emotional intelligence is something that you actually have some control over, and you can work on it like a muscle. You can develop new habits to increase your emotional intelligence, which is the number one predictor of success, successful relationships, both professionally and personally, even your health outcomes from, recuperating from a disease or something like that. So I was hopeful that, those of us that maybe started off with lower emotional intelligence can actually work on that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it's something that what people discover is that by focusing narrowly on your emotional intelligence, it impacts a wide array of behavior, because emotions are the primary driver of our behavior. I mean, literally the signals travel through your limbic system. They trigger an emotional response before you have any rational thought about it. If you think about caveman days, if a saber-toothed tiger jumps out from behind the bushes, that emotional reaction saves your life. In a meeting, when someone says something stupid and you have an emotional reaction to it, that can, ruin your job. So you really, when you work narrowly on your emotional intelligence, you tend to see results in a lot of areas.
That's cool. And why would you say that people generally try to suppress their emotions when they're maybe thinking that they're in a professional setting, ignoring them, which generally causes them to either build up overload, and then, we either kind of hit that fight or flight mode where we either get angry or we get maybe, sad or upset and cry or something like that. But why do you think people generally try to suppress their emotions and suppress that awareness of them in a professional setting?
Well, I think the biggest reason people want to suppress emotions is because they're frightening, right? They're, anyone that's experienced an emotional hijacking and had, an emotion take over their behavior, it can be downright irrational, the amount of emotion you feel. And I think that in a business setting where people feel like they're rewarded for their intellect and their experience, it's a lot safer to just sort of deny that emotions play a role, and that you can make huge mistakes based on emotions that have nothing to do with your intellect and experience. And I think there's a lot of I'll give you an example. I grew up here in San Diego, and I'm a big Padre fan. Yep. And I don't know the Padres general manager, but I've read a lot about him in the media. And what I've read is he's one of these guys that thinks he's a wonderkind and he's smarter than everybody, and you don't need to get along with people to succeed. Well, they hired a really seasoned manager last year. He was very well respected, and they lost him, because of that. So I think that this denial that people's skills and emotions are important, it bites you in the ass in the end.
Yeah, totally. And then I think, you kind of talk about, those types of managers in sports, which maybe come from like the money ball side of things, where it's, statistics and not relationships. But you had also noted in the book that there are 4 different skill sets that you can work on to actually increase emotional intelligence. Can you walk us through those 4 skill sets briefly and maybe give us maybe a nugget or 2 on each one?
Yeah, sure. So the first emotional intelligence skill is self-awareness. And this is your understanding of your emotions in yourself, what you're feeling in the moment, as well as your tendencies across time and situation, how well you're aware of your tendencies and understand your tendencies. That way, what situations and people push your buttons and create difficulty for you. Once you have that awareness, you use the second skill, which is self-management. And self-management is just plain and simple what you do with the emotion that you're feeling. Can you allow an emotion, even a negative emotion that sort of sends you careening in the wrong direction, to produce the behavior that you want? So it's that response to your emotion. On the social side of things, you have social awareness. So that's awareness, yes, of other people's emotions, but it's really about the experience of another person, what the world looks like through their eyes. There's some really interesting research in this regard, where there's a lot of information that people aren't even aware of that their brain picks up on socially. So I'll tell you real quick about this study they did at the University of the Netherlands, where they took people who had cortical lesions. So that means that their eyes work perfectly, but the area of the brain where the signals go had lesions. So they're basically blind because of that. So their eyes could see, but they're not able to process the information, so they have no sight. And what they did is if they put you in front of a computer screen and flashed images of people demonstrating strong emotion, your mirror neurons ensure that you have a quick emotional reaction. So if it's someone laughing, you might crack a little smile. If it's someone really angry, you might furrow your brow a little bit. It's just a natural thing people do. And they put the blind people in front of the monitor, and they had the same reaction, even though they couldn't see anything.
No way.
And it tripped the researchers out. They said, what's going on? What do you see? And they're like, nothing, I'm blind. But through further analysis of the MRIs, they found that actually, as these signals are traveling down the optic nerve from your eyes to the back of your brain, they're branching off and sending signals to the limbic system. So your brain doesn't even have awareness of what it's seeing yet, and it's already having an emotional reaction to what it's picking up on in the world around you. And the way this is demonstrated in real life, right, is I'm sure you've done this. You walk into a room full of people, and you can feel there's a mood in the room, right? You're not sure what's going on yet, but something's going on, and you get that trigger. So social awareness is about keying into this kind of stuff and being really aware of it, being really focused on it, which is hard for a lot of people to do because we tend to focus more on ourselves. And when someone else is talking, we think about how it affects us, what we're going to say next, instead of really focusing on the other person. So when you focus on the other person, you use the final EQ skill, which is relationship management. So that really integrates self-awareness, self-management, and social awareness into how you interact with other people. So there's there's your spouse or your colleague, and there's all this emotion going back and forth. There's lots of two different experiences, 2 different ways to see the world, and people that are good at relationship management can integrate all that information.
That's cool. And then I had heard you quote in an article recently that, we are actually in a state of what some would consider an emotional epidemic in the world right now. Obviously we've never been more divided in political fractures, global news, the connectedness that we all feel from social media, yet it all driving us far apart because maybe we don't have those relationships that we used to have in the real world. Can you maybe touch a little bit on your point of view on what this emotional epidemic looks like and some of the root causes?
Yeah, it's interesting. I have a 14-year-old, and it's really, he was like, taught him to crawl by putting my iPhone out and letting him chase it. You know what I mean? I mean, it's literally, they are the first screen generation, start to finish. And it's interesting because their level of social interaction happens so much less in person than it did in my generation. I mean, um, he doesn't hang out with his friends after school very often, but every day he puts the headset on, he's talking to them playing Fortnite, right?
Yeah.
And our brains just don't evolve that quickly. Evolution takes hundreds of thousands to millions of years. So you have this rapid change in environment over the course of 2 decades, and you have a brain that still expects face-to-face communication. So yeah, I think you end up having an emotional epidemic. You end up having a lot of division and divisiveness, and people not really connecting with people in the same way they used to.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And I think you had also noted that this isn't necessarily a skill set that is taught in schools. It's not taught in primary education, and it's also not taught even in the collegiate academic setting. Can you talk a little bit about what you think is maybe like how the current education system could implement some of these concepts and how that might help foster better outcomes for young people?
Yeah, and it's something that's interesting because I think, coming from California, I don't know what all parts of the country are like because it's pretty liberal and touchy-feely here in the state relative to other states. But at least, seeing my son go through elementary school, I mean, he had teachers that were, they didn't focus on EQ directly, but they did things like Carol Dweck's growth mindset, right? So teaching kids to actually contemplate how they deal with challenges and how they view challenges, right? Is a challenge an opportunity to grow, or is it, if you fail, is that fatal, right? And all this stuff ties into emotional intelligence. So you see it more and more. I mean, I was really honored early in my career that the medical school at USC started using our assessment with doctors to try to improve their bedside manner, and in 2006, that was shocking to me that they would do that. Now I think it's more common. So you see it more and more. I feel like there's been a lot of progress made in that direction.
Yeah, no, that's cool. And how can you increase your emotional intelligence within like a corporate culture? Like, what is the best way to foster an environment of creating the best outcomes for EQ, like within an organization?
Well, you have to do two things. So one is you have to create a culture of accountability around the skill. So
Okay.
it needs to be part of people's performance evaluation. It needs to be something that's discussed in anytime company culture and social norms for social interaction, values and things like that are discussed and explored. And the second piece is you have to give people the tools to achieve this, because some people are more emotionally intelligent than others, and we all can stand to improve from working on our EQ. So you really have to give people the training and the tools required to figure out where they are today objectively, and then what they need to do to go about increasing their EQ and participating in this system of accountability where everyone's working on this.
Got it. Okay. And you talked about, certain people have higher EQ than others. One of the things that I noted from your research is that women naturally have higher degrees of EQ. Can you talk about some of that research and why you think that's true based on maybe just the natural difference between men and women?
Yeah, the interesting thing about the gender, looking at EQ by gender, is that the awareness of emotion is basically equal between men and women. And I think that that's sort of a stereotypical crutch that you hear, like men don't understand emotions in the same way women do. And I think that's not true. The research shows that that's not true.
Interesting.
The place that women really outscore men is on the social side of things, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
being socially aware and responding, being effective relationship managers. And I think a lot of that goes down to socialization. This idea that I guess you could connect it to the patriarchy and the idea that women are caregivers and they're nurturing, and men are supposed to be out, I don't know, earning, hunting, whatever, So I think there's a little bit of that. We all kind of grew up with that. And so there's skills that women have harnessed in ways that men haven't on average. But the differences overall are kind of narrow. They're barely statistically significant. And you obviously see individuals that are, buck the trend.
Got it. And then another fascinating thing that I found from your research is that CEOs and director level management on up actually score lower than middle managers within an organization. Do you have some thoughts on, why that is true? Why, as people kind of climb the corporate ladder, sometimes you would think that that's the best predictor of outcome, but then the research shows that some of these folks score even lower than their contemporaries below them.
Yeah, so what we see is that emotional intelligence scores, on average, if you take a cross section of people, they peak in middle management. So scores climb as people start to get supervisory responsibility or and end up in a management role, a middle management role. And why is that? Well, companies promote people because they're good with people. That's like the number one thing they look at for middle managers. But as you go from middle management to executive roles, senior executive roles, the C-suite, all the way down to the CEO, it's a ski slope. I mean, the scores drop all the way down to CEOs having the lowest EQ scores on average in the workplace. Wow. So yeah, and it's crazy and it's counterintuitive because the idea is that, emotional intelligence is a predictor of performance. So why would the people at the top have the lowest EQ? Well, among CEOs, those with the highest levels of EQ are the top performers. Wow. It's just that organizations are reinforcing a lack of EQ by promoting people based on their tenure, their industry knowledge, their track record, and just thinking that how they interact with people doesn't matter as much as it does for a manager, but it absolutely does. So, that one is starting to get people's attention and get them to think differently about their promotion practices.
Yeah, I could imagine. And I think that's another good data point that, CEOs, the top performing CEOs are still CEOs that have a higher EQ than those that, just made it based on other outcomes. Like you mentioned, people being promoted for the wrong reasons. Something else that you noted in the most recent book was that, people who are good at and have high degrees of EQ can also use it for nefarious purposes. They can be manipulative. They can be potentially have sociopathic qualities or personalities. What can we do as people who are trying to safeguard our organizations, our families, our investments maybe? What can we do to look out for people that maybe have high EQ, but are actually have bad intentions?
Yeah, one of the most popular, there's multiple chapters, but one of the most popular sections in my new book is about dealing with toxic people. So these are folks that push your buttons, that manipulate people. They don't play nice with others, but they're really good at the manipulation side of things. And in some cases, people do use their emotional intelligence, right? Their social awareness, their awareness of what's important to you and what drives you to push you around. So in emotional intelligence habits, I teach people how to set boundaries. First of all, how to understand the type of toxic person they're dealing with and how this person operates, and then use that knowledge to set boundaries and to basically separate themselves from what they can. This might be a family member, this might be a coworker, this is someone that you're sort of stuck with interacting with, but you can interact with them differently and greatly reduce your stress levels once you have the tools. So that's a big thing with the new book. It's all about giving people tools to adopt certain emotional intelligence habits that are important to their life, and dealing with toxic people is a big one.
Yeah, I love that. I love that, the first two books were still tons of practical application, but a lot of examples and storytelling to kind of outline the concepts. And this most recent book is all about, hey, how can you actually create skill sets and repeatable habits that allow you to make it iterative gains in these areas. So thanks for mentioning and noting that. So one of the things that I thought was an interesting principle that you mentioned was leaning into discomfort is actually a way to increase your EQ. Can you talk a little bit about why that idea of, if you are actually looking at facing a challenge or a difficult outcome or a challenging period of time in your life, why that is actually an opportunity to learn and increase your EQ?
Yeah, well, much of increases in emotional intelligence, they stem from an increase in awareness. That's at least where they start. And increases in awareness by their nature can be kind of painful and uncomfortable because it's bringing something to your attention where you fall short, or maybe you don't live up to the standards that you have for yourself. So that's really where I talk about this idea of leaning into the discomfort, is understanding that when you feel that uncomfortable state, you're learning about yourself in a way that is actually going to eradicate that behavior in the future. Trying to stuff your feelings and sort of ignore it is just going to allow it to continue beneath your awareness. So you're still having the problems. You're just not aware of them.
So the awareness piece is actually that opportunity to flex those muscles and get better.
Yeah.
I love that. Another really practical tip that I found was this idea of checking in before you start a meeting can actually increase the potential EQ opportunity for the meeting itself. Can you talk a little bit about that idea, the check-in with creating better meeting outcomes for groups?
Well, we find that teams in the workplace settings have their own emotional intelligence. There's a lot of groupthink that goes on and shared emotions. So oftentimes, if you want to have a productive meeting that doesn't, sort of spin in circles, it's good to check in, see where people are at, sort of what they're bringing to the table that day. And it can be really valuable. I mean, sometimes there's not a whole lot going on and you can move through that quickly. It's not like you have to have a drum circle or hug a tree or do crazy. It's just a matter of, checking in where people are at, what their stress level's like, what they're feeling, and just being that, it's to build awareness. So it's awareness of the team's emotional intelligence.
Yeah, no, I love that. One thing that I definitely loved about working for Keith Ferrazzi is that he was a master of this, and he did it over the concept of what we called long, slow dinners, where, you kind of had some kind of a question that was a thought-provoking question that he would maybe open up the dinner and ask everybody to go around the table and, what was the most impactful thing that happened to you that week was like a very common one, right? And like you mentioned, some people take that opportunity to kind of just brush it off and move on quickly. Others might take that opportunity to be bravado-ish or kind of flex in front of the room and, oh yeah, I closed a $50 million deal or something like that.
Yeah.
But what I was always amazed was when, the person completely opened up and gave some really vulnerable answer about, man, I'm really dealing with this crazy situation in my marriage, or, something's going on with my kid that is really gnarly. And we're talking like rooms of complete strangers, right?
Yeah.
And sometimes I feel like just providing that opportunity, for people to at least just have that doorway cracked. You never know when the dam is just going to burst and flush open. And those are really great opportunities to accelerate relationship development, I would imagine.
Yeah, because it facilitates learning where people are coming from, right? And increasing that social awareness. They may not readily share it, so only the most astute people in the room are going to pick up on it. So let's just bring it to the front and be open about it. And then, knowing that someone's going through that is going to impact how you interact with them and, probably make things more effective.
Yeah, no, I love that. So one of the most interesting outtakes that I really loved in the book was this idea that, we've talked about all the reasons why having high EQ is important for, parenting and being successful in school and being successful in your job and your organization. But what I thought was pretty awesome to highlight and was very surprising to me was the idea that you guys studied folks that had high EQ actually had a better propensity to recover from chronic illness, things like heart congestion or cardiac arrest or cancer. Can you talk about correlation and why do you think that is, that those folks have a better propensity to essentially heal their bodies even?
Yeah, well, these were university studies, and the idea is that your emotional state affects your immune system, which we obviously know because of stress. Stress has been really well studied, and people who spend a good deal of time in high stress environments have really poor health outcomes. Not just sort of situational ones like diabetes and obesity, but also terminal ones. It affects longevity. So they got to question, well, if someone is, let's say, recovering from a major surgery, open heart surgery, or they also studied people who were fighting cancer, let's focus on their strategies for how they deal with this stressful state that they're in. So let's help them to develop resilience and emotional awareness and good emotion management. And they saw, improved health outcomes across the board, where with the people went through the intervention, they had better health. And I mean, I feel like it's powerful when you read it, but it kind of drives home something that I think we all intuitively know, that our mental state affects our physical state.
Yeah, totally. And even, things like they say, try and not be so stressed out, exercise, spend time with friends and family. You'll have better health outcomes. Those are obvious from a physiology perspective, but also just a state of mind perspective as well.
Absolutely.
I love it. So something that I have noticed is that multitasking, you mentioned, is something that can lead to poor EQ. If you're typing while your colleague is in a meeting, or you're on your phone and not paying attention, you're trying to do too many things at once, and you have too many inputs and not enough concentration on either the thing that you're doing, the person that you're talking to, the task at hand. Can you talk a little bit about that idea of multitasking leading to poor EQ outcomes?
Yeah, this is something they've researched really closely at Stanford. And they found that people who multitask, the more they multitask, the less productive they are. And the lowest productivity among multitaskers is with people who think they're good at multitasking. So, and the bottom line is your brain isn't wired to do two things at once. Sure, you can chew gum and spin tap your head or whatever little game you want to play. But the idea is that your brain is really structured to focus very carefully and closely on one thing at a time. And when you try to give it two inputs, it can't give its full attention to both. So, people think it's additive to add more things, but they really do better when they just focus on a single thing.
Yeah, no, I love that. That's something that I've been trying to be very cognizant of is, especially when I'm doing deep learning is, turn off Slack, turn off the text messages. If I have a meeting or a dinner with my wife, I leave the phone in the office or in my pocket, or even on Sundays now, I'm actually leaving my phone at home, like for the entire day.
Oh, that's great. Yeah.
Yeah, it was cool. Like the first Sunday, I almost had a panic attack. And then by the second Sunday, it was like liberating. And I was like, man, I can't wait till Sunday rolls around. I don't even have a phone unless I need it for a map or something like that. So very cool. So in the first book, in Leadership 2.0, you talked about a concept that I thought was really interesting. And I wonder if you would maybe elaborate on it a little bit. The idea of organizational justice. What is organizational justice, and how can we foster those cultures within our work environments as leaders?
Yeah, org justice was my other big grad school topic, something I really gravitated to. I actually looked at, in my dissertation research, I looked at emotional intelligence and the connections to org justice. And Or justice is this idea of fairness in the workplace, and not fairness in the sense of equality, because you can't realistically achieve perfect equality, but fairness in the sense of understanding that people want to provide input. They want to have a say in how things go. And even if you don't follow their ideas and recommendations, they still want to have a voice. So organizations tend to try to sort of sweep things under the rug and not tell people things and not have sort of group discussion about what's going on if their mind, senior leadership has already made up their mind. But the justice research shows that if you give people an opportunity to offer their input, their productivity increases, their satisfaction with their job increases. So organizational justice is an organizational culture thing where you try to create an environment where people can provide input.
Yeah, I love that. And what I thought was interesting about when you kind of expanded upon it in Leadership 2.0 was the idea that, just because you give people the opportunity to have dialogue, that doesn't mean they get to set the rules, but just the idea of them getting to voice their opinion and have a say, whether that ultimately is inputted or not, just that opportunity to be heard actually highly increase people's motivation of feeling, part of the team, bought into the culture, even if they didn't think the practice or the particular policy was, fair, such as this whole debate we're having right now about, should we be in the office or should we keep up with this virtual environment that the post-COVID era has created?
Yeah, and it works one-on-one too. It works in your relationships where, you ask someone for their input and you ask for how they feel about the situation and what they think should be done. Listening to that has a really strong effect on people, even if you might not agree with what they have to say, and that might not be the route you want to go.
Nice.
It's valuable.
Yeah, I like that. So I want to switch gears for the last 20% of the show, and I want to put on my hat as a marketer, and I want to have you talk about things from the perspective of as a marketer. And you may already be aware that you're a really amazing marketer, but even though that isn't maybe your primary job responsibility or what you set out to do with the content that you're creating and thought leadership, but you have a lot of street cred on talking to people of how they should be approaching social media on LinkedIn specifically, which is becoming one of the most social platforms and the fastest growing social platform. A lot of people don't like to think of LinkedIn as that, but it really is. And you have the distinction of a post that you did in 2017 still being the most watched video post in the history of LinkedIn with over 3.7 million views. I would like to ask you first to talk a little bit about that experience, talk about what you set out to achieve when you created that post, and why do you think it hit so profoundly and went so wide?
Well, first of all, I love marketing, and my business was called Talent Smart. I mean, it still is, but I don't own it anymore. And I ran that business for about 20 years, and I ran marketing the entire time, even when we got fairly big, and had 25 employees and 100 contractors. I delegated a lot of things that I wanted to have people running it who were more passionate about it than I was, but no one was ever more passionate about marketing than I was. So I ran. And honestly, with being retired the last few years, part of the reason I wrote a new book, well, there's two reasons. One, I was sitting on really good information I felt needed to be shared. Yep. So that's why I wrote Emotional Intelligence Habits, but it also gives me something to market. And I like that because I wake up every day and it's like, how can I build awareness for this book? What am I going to do today to help people know that this book exists and that it can help? So yeah, LinkedIn is just one of many things I tried over the years. And because my message of emotional intelligence is really well received in the workplace and the workplace learning environment, it just really clicked there. And a lot of it's interesting because that article on stress being my number one article was one I just kind of wrote because I was interested in it and I was passionate about it. and that's kind of catching lightning in a bottle, I think. That's sort of this idea of you have this like really creative person that makes something really cool and puts it on Instagram, and all of a sudden 50 million people like it, and it's this weird art or weird whatever. That's catching lightning in a bottle. The other thing, the bulk of my pieces were based on research, and I would research what's viral, what do people want to read about.
Wow.
And a lot of the stuff that I write about that people love the most, like likability, breaking bad habits, different aspects of leadership I hadn't really thought about, are based on research. So you write something viral, but there's a lot of thought that goes into it, and understanding it has a good chance of doing so.
That's awesome. So essentially, you're not just creating content in a vacuum based on your research, but you're actually you have a feedback loop, and you're looking at what topics are trending and what things are hitting in the culture and where are those trending moments. And then how do you take your IP and essentially match it to that topic, because it's already got some juice in the ethos, and you kind of hit that sweet spot of, on message, but also on trend.
Yeah. I think that as a marketer, doing your homework on what people want, right? You want to develop a product that people want. I mean, my second emotional intelligence book, sold something like 3 million copies, is a big bestseller. And we surveyed the readers of my first emotional intelligence book and asked them what they wanted in the next book, and then we delivered it to them. So, and over the life of that book, people asked for more habits. They wanted more emotional intelligence habits. So that's why I wrote Emotional Intelligence Habits. But yeah, you want to be armed with information so that you can use your time more efficiently in producing products that people want.
I love it. So what was the bump of that one viral post? Like, how many LinkedIn followers did you have before that? Now you have 2.5 million. Was it pretty impactful in hockey sticking your growth? And were you already a top voice on LinkedIn before that?
So I asked to join what was called, it's called Top Voice now. It used to be called the Influencer Program.
Yeah.
I asked to join it. I was told that it was closed. I wrote the article on stress. It got 1 million views in like a day, right away. And then I wrote an article on toxic people that also got 1 million views in like a day. And all of a sudden they reached out to me, invited me to join the influencer program.
They opened it back up, huh?
Yeah, so that was cool. And honestly, I ran into a lot of stuff like that in my career. You may think I'm well known, but there's plenty of people that don't, right? And you just bump into people all the time, and they tell you that you're not a fit for the program.
Yeah.
So I kind of backed my way into that. And at the time, if you were an influencer, your post went to like the top of people's feed.
Wow.
And if you were the #1 post for a day, the next 24 hours, anytime someone read an article on LinkedIn, it loaded your post next. So it was like this really primed viral environment. It was crazy. I was writing 2-3 articles, new articles a week. It was a lot of work, because the bang for the buck was so high, right? The results you would get were just massive. And now their algorithm is a little more subdued, but yeah, because of that, I was able to build 2.5 million followers really quickly.
That's wild. So you basically had a pin post at the top of your LinkedIn feed every single day, as long as you put out fresh content.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's cool. So what are your thoughts on kind of LinkedIn becoming an influencer marketing platform? Do you get hit up a lot by agencies like mine that want you to do content in partnership with brands? I imagine speaking is already a normal part of your repertoire, being a New York Times bestseller, and you're probably signed up with a speaking bureau or something like that. But what's your take on kind of LinkedIn influencer marketing and you being a part of that commodity ecosystem now?
Well, the biggest difference between it and being, say, an Instagram influencer or something is you're not allowed to do paid placement. So whenever I've had requests for that, I just ignore it, because part of being a LinkedIn top voice is that it's just your voice.
Yep.
But you are able to, it creates visibility for my books. And yeah, it's interesting to me to see people like Snoop Dogg go on LinkedIn and start posting. I mean, it shows you that the site has a lot of activity. I mean, everything I post there gets more views, more comments, more reactions than anything I post anywhere else. So it's tremendously valuable.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. So I wanted to also ask you about something that I saw in your LinkedIn program, an app that I downloaded this morning called LeadX. What I'm guessing is, without being able to dive too much in it yet, this is essentially a platform that takes a lot of these habits and a lot of these concepts. It says, you got to do something for 30 days or 60 days to make it a habit. And I think that's always been the hard part of operationalizing great IP is, how do you get it out of a book and how do you get it into some type of checklist or program or something where you can actually start operationalizing the concept. So here's a concept. Now do these things every single day, every single week, every single month, every single quarter, every single year. Is that the idea of LeadX, of kind of using the push platform of an app to actually start to operationalize some of these concepts? Is it just for your IP, or is it for leadership ideas from other IP sources as well?
Yeah, so LeadX is an app that was developed by a friend of mine who was very early in the e-learning space. And he built and sold a couple of businesses in that space. And I remember him, at the time really pushing e-learning. And I'm usually behind the curve on sort of these kind of trends, So when he said, look, here's the thing, I'm building this app. It uses generative AI to give people nudges and help them form new behaviors. I listened, and I invested in the company, and I have an advisory role there as the chief people scientist. And what it does is it integrates a lot of things about you. So whatever you tell it, it uses AI to make recommendations. So it includes, for example, some assessments that you can take, personality assessments, emotional intelligence assessments. You can take existing tests that are really popular, like the Strengths Finder, and tell it what your scores are. So you feed it data, and then it takes that data and it gives you nudges. It makes recommendations. It recommends articles. It recommends, if you put in your coworkers, it can recommend what you should do to interact with them. I mean, just whatever you feed it, it will make recommendations based on that. Because it's, this is the direction workplace learning is going. It's all app driven, the idea that you're having notifications happening in your pocket. It's a really powerful product. They've acquired a lot of customers in a really short amount of time because it's an amazing product.
Yeah, I can imagine. Well, I'm super excited to find out about it on your LinkedIn profile and to feed it my Strengths Finders test from Clifton and see what it has to say.
Yeah.
All right, Travis, we're getting to the tail end of the show here. So what are you most excited about the future? You've quote unquote retired, you've sold your company, but you're back at it with a new book out there promoting right now. But what are you looking forward to in your work around EQ over the next, say, 6 months to a year?
Yeah, honestly, for me, it's renewed enthusiasm for what I do. I mean, I gravitated towards this stuff at a very young age, but I've always been a really goal-driven person. So I found that as I achieved a lot of my goals, I ended up a little bit lost, right? And that's kind of how I felt when I sold my business. That it was like a part of me was kind of removed. So I'm really enjoying just getting back into the space and sort of feeding that passion. So that's the thing I'm most excited about.
Yeah, no, I can't relate to that personally, but I have a lot of friends who've had successful exits. One of them comes to mind, who sold his company for 160 million, a lot of cash.
Wow.
And then he ended up over at the Cannes Advertising Festival last year. And I was like, bro, what are you doing? Like, you just sold your company for $160 million. Like, why are you at Cannes? You have nothing to promote. You have nothing to do here. He's like, this is where all my friends are, man.
Yeah.
But I am going to Ibiza right after this, on a yacht. But
yeah, he's got the money for it.
Exactly. But I feel like, that's the entrepreneur's dilemma, the entrepreneur's itch is, a lot of your identity is tied into building out a successful company and hitting those goals. And even when you do kind of have that financial, exit, not many of you guys retire. It's always, what's next and how do you continue to fulfill that. So you're doing a great job with the current book. I would recommend it to anybody out there who wants to get better at emotional intelligence. You've seen the data that we've walked through today. I would definitely recommend getting that and reading through it and trying to figure out how to operationalize some of these habits. So I will link to it in the show notes, Travis, but do you want to plug anything specifically around where the audience can go ahead and find that new book and where else they might follow you to stay in touch with all the cool things that you're up to?
Yeah, I think there's two places. I mean, if any of the things I talked about interest you, I think you'll find that my book, Emotional Intelligence Habits, really takes you a lot further with these ideas. And it's finally 50% off on Amazon right now. They took them forever to really discount it heavily. So, it's under $20. And then the other thing would just be to follow me on LinkedIn. I'm posting 2-3 articles a week right now. And I think if you just search on my name, Dr. Travis Bradberry, you can follow and join my newsletter, and you'll get more content like this.
Yeah, I love it. Well, 2.5% of LinkedIn is already following you. So that's a good news. Good start. All right, man. So, hey, for all of you that are following along at home, if you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe or follow us wherever you are viewing or listening to the podcast today. If you enjoyed this episode, if you give us a review, and if that's a positive review, that's actually how we spread our wings and find a larger and more relevant audience every single week. And most importantly, as always, if you enjoyed this episode and my conversation with Travis today, if you would share this episode with a colleague who you think would get some value out of it, we would be extremely appreciative here at the Ad Podcast. So thank you, everybody following along at home. And Travis, thanks so much for spending some time with us today. Great to get to know you, and stoked to meet another smart, cool person in the San Diego neighborhood. So thanks again.
Yeah, thanks. It was a pleasure.